Everyone, welcome back into another episode of the Patriots Daily Podcast here on the CLNS Media Network, powered by Prize Picks and Game Time. He's Tayler Kyles, I'm Mike Kadlick, and we are back again, this time to go through what the Patriots' final 53-man roster may look like in September. Now, Taylor just posted an in-depth breakdown of what he thinks the roster will look like. That's up on clnsmedia.com if you want to go check that out. What we're going to do today is basically go position by position. I'll leave it up to Taylor to sort of explain his thought process behind each position room, who he keeps on the team, who he cuts. I'll give some feedback. We'll try and do a little bit rapid fire because there's obviously a lot, not really rapid fire, but there's a lot of position groups and obviously not a lot of time in the day. So we'll go through all that. And obviously it's probably our favorite saying on the podcast, Taylor, grain of salt, but like it's June. We're just using minicamp. There's so much time in between. There's training camp, there's injuries, there's, PUP lists and stuff like that. So again, let's just, before all the comments go, why are you keeping this guy and not that guy? Blah, blah, stuff's going to happen between now and then. We're just using what we saw in minicamp. So before we get started, was there any really hard decisions you had to make in this thing, Taylor? Like guys who were maybe on the bubble, maybe on the fringe that you thought, they could make it, they may not. Like what was the hardest decision when you went through this whole thing?
Honestly, this one was pretty easy. Like I'm sure you remember last year, I was texting you guys like every single time I wrote one of these up, just like, can you guys look at this and let me know what you think? I feel like there were a lot of position groups that were really difficult. Honestly, I banged this one out pretty easily. I made a couple of tweaks after my initial attempt, but I was like, when it came down to 53, I was honestly shocked. Going through which ones were tough, not a ton. Maybe like cornerback, because I feel like there is a lot of talent at the position, and a lot of it is guessing who's going to end up coming out on top. Wide receiver was kind of tricky, but a lot of these positions, I feel like they're veterans that are going to hold it down, maybe provide depth, and then young guys where it's pretty obvious they are in the team's long-term plans. I think also the fact that we are in kind of a rebuild makes it easier, where there are picks that were made where it's pretty clear the new regime is probably trying to either distance themselves from those picks. They're giving everybody a fair shake, but just schematically, some guys fit better than others, which made it a lot easier. But yeah, this one was a lot easier than I expected it to be. Not a lot of really tight battles in terms of, I can't decide whether to put this guy on or leave him off. It's more like, we'll see what happens in training camp. And that also makes it easy because, that small sample size, we haven't seen the battles get really intense yet.
Yeah, good point. So let's get right into it. Quarterbacks. Position number one, probably one of the easiest ones to kind of decide too, with the way that the room is shaped up. So you had Jacoby Brissett, Drake May, and Joe Milton making the team, with Bailey Zappi getting cut. Kind of obvious, but why did you make that decision? And I'll add to it. Do you think there's a chance that Joe Milton may also be cut, and this team just goes with two quarterbacks in Brissett and May when the season starts?
So I'll start at the top. Jacoby Brissett and Drake May are locked. I feel like those are two of the safest guys on the roster. Jacoby Brissett, even if he isn't the week one starter, does give you an excellent level of mentorship, leadership, the things that he brings in the quarterback room, the experience in Alex Van Pelt's offense, and the fact that he was with the Patriots and he was with Tom Brady. I think you want a lot of that to seep into Drake May early on in his career so we can understand how to be a professional. Like when you look at Drake May's scouting reports, they're glowing in terms of his personality, how likable he is, his ability to command a room, but he is still young and he's still growing. So Jacoby Brissett's a great guy for him to learn from. And also Jacoby was the most consistent quarterback. He wasn't the most electric. There weren't a lot of plays where you were like, oh, damn, outside of like some red zone throws. And that's where Drake May really has a chance to seize this job if he makes advancements over this break and in the summer, because he was making those wow throws where you're like, oh my goodness, just the natural ability, moving defenders, ball placement to throw guys open. The fact that he bounced back on that last day of minicamp from some rough throws and made the play he needed to at the last second to, get the defense doing push-ups. It shows you that it's not as surprising as maybe it would have been before they hit the field if Drake ends up being the week one starter. Still a long way to go. And then to answer the Joe Milton question, that maybe was one of the tougher decisions I had to make. But the way I see it, it's kind of like Malik Cunningham, where they did end up cutting him and he did make it to the practice squad. But with a guy like Joe Milton, I think he gives you such maybe not like high floor isn't the right word, but the talent where he has the size. Yeah. He's an older prospect, so I think the maturity is there as well. and the fact that his arm is just unreal. I think it's enough talent where in a league where backup quarterbacks are so important, I think that he could end up getting poached or signed if the team ends up picking him. So I just don't think you want to risk it, especially considering the team clearly invested in him because they wanted to see if they could turn him into, some kind of trade chip down the road. So I can't see them exposing him either on waivers or the practice squad. And to wrap it up with Bailey Zappi, I mean, the only way that we really saw him sticking on the roster was if Drake May truly wasn't ready by September and you're saying, hey, we don't want to throw him in too soon if something happens to Jacoby Brissett. So at least we have a veteran who's been in the league, has won some games. You can debate how good he is, but you can't really debate that he's at least been functional. But Drake May ended up taking that backup quarterback spot in the rotation before OTAs were even over. And I think that's kind of a death knell for Bailey Zappi's chances on the roster long term. He's obviously going to go into camp. They said they were going to carry 4 quarterbacks into the summer, which makes some sense because Joe Milton is purely, I think, a developmental guy at this point. But, once roster cuts come down, I don't know how you justify keeping 4 quarterbacks.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Zappi's time on this team is pretty much over. Obviously, like you said, they're going to go in with 4 and kind of use him as a camp arm. But I think the second that May passed him on the depth chart was really the writing on the wall, right? It's kind of what we just said, and I'm kind of reiterating it. But his spot on this team was if May's development didn't happen quickly, and he could be a steady backup behind Brissett, so they didn't have to throw May into the fire. But now they think they can throw him into the fire. Sorry, Bailey, your time's kind of done. And as far as Milton goes, I think, again, we have to do it now, and we're doing it now because it's June 20th. But I think training camp, preseason, is going to have a lot to do with the decision they make on Milton. Because if he goes out there and can show a lot of, intangibles on the field and, not so much intangibles, but the arm strength, the athleticism, some growth from the stuff that he was knocked on in college, then you can't really get rid of him because someone's just going to poach him. So instead, you keep him on the roster. And it's also going to depend on the other position groups and the camp battles there, because if they want to keep an extra receiver, they may risk getting rid of Joe Milton or vice versa. So we'll see what happens there. But overall, I think that sort of nails it on the head. I think they're going to keep 3 and get rid of Zappi.
And one more thing, I maybe should have said this in the intro, but one reason that these roster projections, I understand I'm, the guy who doesn't love jumping to conclusions, but it's important to see in each phase of the offseason where the roster kind of stacks up. So, if something happens and Drake May ends up sliding and then Bailey Zappi does end up on the roster, we can at least compare and say, oh, wow, in the spring, the roster was looking this way. And now once we're in the summer, it's looking totally different. So that's kind of the value of doing these roster projections. Way too early roster projections for sure, but it's really just kind of a timestamp and saying, okay, this is how it looked at this point. Let's see how it grows and develops, because we're probably going to end up doing like 3 or 4 of these by the time we actually get down to roster cuts.
Yep. So let's move on to the running backs. You keep 3, and they are Ramondre Stevenson, Antonio Gibson, and Jermichael Hasty. And out is Kevin Harris, Deshaun Fenwick, Terrell Jennings, 2 rookies and a veteran in Kevin Harris, who's going on his 3rd season, I believe, in the league. So again, a room that I would say is relatively easy to sort of look at right now. I think Kevin Harris is, he's gotten his shot the last couple of years. He hasn't done too much with it. He's played okay, but he's kind of up and down. And then 2 undrafted guys in Fenwick and Jennings are they seem like bodies. They're here for the summer and maybe they can latch on. But first off, your reasoning behind keeping the 3 in Stevenson, Gibson, and Hasty, and then is there any chance Fenwick and Jennings can make a run for the roster, when September comes?
Yeah, so some of these positions are going to be really quick because we didn't get to see much of them. I mentioned in my article, things like ball carrying, tackling, block shedding, blocking. We don't get to really see any of that happen because these are non-padded practices with minimal contact. So running back, obviously, the reason that Jermichael Hasty made it over some other guys is because he actually showed up as a receiver. You saw him catch passes underneath. He was a screen target. There was that one practice where he caught like 2 or 3 touchdowns. One was really impressive. It was a back shoulder throw from Jacoby Brissett that we were all kind of like, oh, that was a little something. It's not the regular throw to the flat wide open and just make sure you cross the goal line. So that's why I kind of gave him the edge over other guys. Kevin Harris has basically lived on the practice squad. So I feel like that kind of goes without saying, unless he really pops and shows a development and a more well-rounded skill set, I'm not really sure it's fair to assume that he's going to make the roster.
Right.
The young guys are interesting. Terrell Jennings, for one, we didn't really get to see him. He didn't participate for most of the spring, but he was someone who was a rookie tryout that they wound up signing after rookie minicamp. So it's too soon to completely, say that he's done on the roster unless obviously he ends up getting cut. We don't really know what his situation is. But the fact that he did end up signing was interesting. And Deshaun Fenwick is a guy who I actually liked during the pre-draft process. Yeah. Not a, super guy that's maybe going to catch your attention, but he's well-rounded. He's older, but he doesn't have a lot of tread on his tires. And that, I think, is a really big thing where you're thinking, okay, he's mature. Maybe he'll be able to pick things up a little quicker, but he's not somebody who has a ton of tread like a Kevin Harris, who was used. Right. He had an injury, but also took a lot of carries in college. And I think he's a tough runner, the kind of guy who's not going to lose you yards very often. He's multiple in terms of the run schemes that he's had experience in, and that obviously fits in this run game. And he can catch passes. He's a solid route runner, nothing fantastic, but kind of like Ramondre Stevenson, where he can catch passes out of the backfield. And he's a very willing pass blocker, has some room to grow in that area of his game. But the fact that we've seen that he can do it is pretty significant. So I think he's the guy for me that I'm really going to be looking out for once the pads come on and the physicality ramps up, because that's more his game. And I think it'll give him more of a chance to earn more reps and maybe show how well-rounded he can be with like the second or third teams.
Yeah, right. It's not a coincidence that, two guys in Gibson and Hasty, who are more pass catching backs or have that kind of ability in their toolbox, make it after OTAs with no pads or anything like that. We'll see what happens. And we'll see what happens, who they use to spell a guy like Stevenson. Do they rely on those two guys? Do we see a lot more Kevin Harris that kind of gives us a hint of, oh, he's going to be their number two and, things like that. But you're right. I don't see him being picked up should they cut him. So he could end right back up on the practice squad just like he has been. So yeah, another pretty cut and dry room. I think the only thing we wonder now is if and when the Ramondre Stevenson extension comes into play. So we have a little bit
touched on Stevenson and Antonio Gibson, but that's really because when we're in practice, and we should mention that because you guys aren't in practices, right. They are clearly the 1-2 punch here. Ramondre is very much the lead back. Antonio Gibson's going to be the change of pace / receiver back. And also, I don't know how much we're actually allowed to say, but I think we can safely say that Antonio Gibson's role in this offense is going to be very interesting, and I think they're going to maximize his ability to line up all over the field and act as a true wide receiver, not just a running back.
I was just going to say a little he played wide receiver in college, so you might see a little bit more of that from Antonio Gibson as well. They were using him in a lot of different places. So we'll get to wide receiver, one of the more, I guess, contentious position groups here, because there's guys who could make it, couldn't make it. We'll see what happens. But before we do that, quick word from my friends over at Prize Picks.
Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today. The finals mean more on Prize Picks, and so do the star players. You get boosted payouts on select basketball stars that you won't find anywhere else. When the finals are over, the hoops action doesn't stop on Prize Picks. Women's basketball is just getting started, and with young stars like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese looking to make names for themselves, alongside greats like Brianna Stewart and Asia Wilson, you can win up to 100 times your cash watching them ball out. This week on Prize Picks, I'm looking at the basketball board, and I'm taking Jaylen Brown's overs on points and rebounds because dude has been absolutely killing it. I'm also going to take Caitlin Clark for more than 3.5 3-pointers made and Brianna Stewart for more than 25 points. Download the app today and use the code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
Right, wide receivers, Taylor. Like I said, a contentious group, I guess. There's a lot to be made of the Patriots wide receiver core, and whether they have a true number one, if it's a bunch of number twos, guys who play X, guys who play Z. I think really the only true lock. Well, I guess there's a couple because you got two rookies, but I mean, Demario Douglas is as safe on this roster as you could say. But besides that, a lot of guys: Tyquan Thornton, Juju, Kendrick Bourne's coming off an injury, KJ Osborne's only on a 1-year deal, so. What decisions did you have to make in this room, and why did you make them? And I'll say it right now. I'll go right off the bat. Jalen Reagor does make the roster, a guy who does bring some special teams ability. So why'd you make the decisions on all these guys in the room?
Yeah, so I had Kendrick Bourne either on the PUP list or on injured reserve. Yeah. You didn't see him for any of the spring which is understandable. He also uploaded some videos of him running, and you just see it and you're like, I don't know how soon he's actually going to be able to go full speed and really compete. Right. So Gerard Mayo did say that everyone but Cole Strange will be available in the summer. So that's a positive sign. But with so many young guys who are kind of competing for spots, and I feel like the back end of this position group is going to, like you said, there's going to be a lot of competition. Yeah. It's important to sign a 3-year deal. You don't got to rush him back out there. It's not a contract situation where he has to prove himself. You know what you have in him. He's a valued veteran leader. He's going to give you a lot, even if he isn't on the field. So I think you wait until he's fully healthy. No need to risk it. But on the roster, like you said, Demario Douglas, Javon Baker, Jalen Polk, all guys who made plays this spring, all guys who are pretty much roster locks. After them, Jalen Reagor is one guy that I feel like is the safest of the guys towards the end of the position group because he offers that kick return value. He looks like he's the top guy at that spot. We saw against Buffalo that he can take it back to the crib. He can break tackles. So that's very valuable, especially now the kickoffs are actually a play. And he's going to get a lot.
I know. I wonder. That's kind of what I wonder with him is, do they find him more valuable, or are they like, oh, we can do this with anybody? And that's, again, they're going to have to work through all of that. But you're right. So far, he's lined up as that top guy, and he's looked like, at least has a solid understanding of what they're going to do, and he can be that skill set for them.
Yeah, and we've seen guys like Jalen Polk, KJ Osborne, Demario Douglas. They've gotten some opportunities as well. Antonio Gibson, like a lot of people have been in the mix, but I don't think anybody offers the speed that Jalen Reagor does and the physicality as a returner. That's what gives him the edge for me. And when he's caught the ball, you see the speed and the dynamic ability, obviously, that you'd see on kick returns. So I do think there's some value there. He's also the second string X receiver in practices from what we've seen. So that feels, again, like he is the safest of the back end of the position. And then I actually had Kayshon Boutte making it over Tyquan Thornton.
What?
It sounds crazy, but the thing with Tyquan Thornton has been consistency and availability. Yeah. And we've talked about it in other shows. I don't really want to, beat a dead horse, but he hasn't shown those things yet in the spring. And again, there hadn't been a ton of practices. We're going off, 6 sessions, maybe 7 that we saw in total. Yeah. But the fact that he only had one really good day, didn't really pop in other days. He had a drop that was pretty rough. Just one drop, but still, when you talk about a guy who needs to prove himself, they gave him the starting X job, and which felt like a sign they're saying, hey, seize this. We want you to get around this team. He brings that speed that no one else, not even Jalen Reagor, does. But we haven't really seen the speed. Part of that is, there's a lot of red zone work. He hasn't really gotten an opportunity to. I think he caught one deep ball from Drake May, which was the day that he flashed, and we just haven't seen it since. And the day that he missed was the day that Kayshon Boutte just ate. He dominated in the red zone, showed strong hands. You saw the frame, the ability to work the sideline. The fact that Kayshon Boutte, in terms of injury, has been pretty clean, and just the frame and the skill set where Alex Austin called him a 3-level threat, where he can really – I think he's been really, the third string X. I think I'm trying to think. He was the second string X the day that Tyquan Thornton missed. But they have him as an X, but I think he's really better as a Z. It's just they have a ton of Z's, so I think they don't want to put him there. But I think he's also a position versatile player. So I just think it's hard at this stage to assume that Tyquan's going to make it over him because Tyquan hasn't shown much. And I think just based on purely skill set, it makes more sense to keep Kayshon Boutte in contract than Tyquan Thornton. I will add that we don't know what's going to happen in terms of league discipline. It feels like the league hasn't prioritized with all the gambling and everything, figuring out what would happen if Kayshon Boutte made the roster. There could be complications if he ends up on the 53, because then the league is probably going to have to figure out some way to handle that situation. So that could also play into the mix. We'll see. But yeah, those are the guys I have on. Juju Smith-Schuster, he told us he was 100%. We don't believe it, because he's practicing by himself with Tyler Hughes. He doesn't look like he's going full speed out there, or at least he doesn't look explosive, which is just like last season. We saw that one game against the Steelers where he did start to pop, and we're like, oh, maybe, we're going to get the Juju we expected. But the fact that we're so far removed from that game and it still doesn't look great is not promising. Didn't show anything to warrant a roster spot. And this team has enough money that it sucks they're going to have to eat. I think it's around $10 million in dead cap, but give out bad contracts, you gotta move on at some point.
That's the part that I wonder is he a trade candidate? Can they get something for him where it doesn't hurt as less to get, take that cap hit? Now, a team could easily call their bluff, because if they're trying to trade for him, just let him go. And then, we can try and sign him, but that also kind of lets them dictate, okay, we can get him. We don't have to outbid anyone, blah, blah, blah. But realistically, like, I don't know if there's much of a market out there for him. Like you said, he didn't look healthy last year. He doesn't seem healthy this year. And yeah, I don't know where he fits on this roster either. I wonder if I wonder what Taekwon missed the last practice for, because if it's health related, that's scary because again, he can't stay healthy. If it was some excused absence, whatever, blah, blah. Okay. At least he stayed healthy through the spring, was a roller coaster, and perhaps he could get here in training camp and shine. But we know, again, we haven't seen that before. So there's no real reason to think it's going to happen again. But that's beating a dead horse because we've done the Taekwon thing. I do find it interesting that you have Booty making the roster. But again, it's a room that has a lot of this sort of similar skill sets and guys that it's kind of like close, like, Booty versus Thornton. What upside do you want to take? I do like Booty's upside right now better too, because essentially we've seen less of it. Like, we've seen what we have in Taekwon. It's nothing great. At least Booty gives you a chance to maybe find that top tier number one wide receiver he was at LSU however many years ago. So we'll see what happens.
He was in a tough spot last season with Troy Brown. I always say this. We all love Troy Brown. He was demoted for a reason. That wide receiver room just was not cutting it for the most part. Even DeMario Douglas, as great of a season as he had, there were a ton of route issues where he didn't seem like he was on the same page as quarterbacks. I think Kayshon Boutte kind of got the short end of the stick where whatever was going on where he wasn't getting playing time unless the team was absolutely desperate. Obviously, there was that first game against the Eagles, but first game as a pro when you're still kind of in that college headspace of 1 foot in, that's understandable. But it feels like he didn't really get a fair shake either. And like you said, we've seen more of Thornton. Not a ton either, to be fair. But I think if you're going purely based on skill set and contract, it makes way more sense to keep Kayshon than Taekwon.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right, moving on to tight ends, another pretty cut and dry room, but you have Hunter Henry, Austin Hooper, and Jaheim Bell making it with LaMichael Petway, Mitchell Wilcox, and Jacob Warren off the roster. Again, kind of cut and dry. I think it makes the most sense. Henry was re-signed. He's a veteran. He was a captain. Austin Hooper was also signed. He knows the offense. He worked with Alex Van Pelton in Cleveland. And then Jaheim Bell, 7th-round pick, but a guy who we talked about on draft night, or draft weekend, rather, seemingly kind of fell a little bit. Might as well take a chance on his skill set. Can do a lot of different things, and has shown some stuff in camp so far. So I'm with you. I think those three make the roster. Since I think it's pretty cut and dry, my question to you is, can Petway, can Wilcox, can Warren do anything to surpass one of these guys and either make the roster over them or warrant carrying a 4th tight end?
Yeah, to be fair, LaMichael Petway, I had a little bit of issue with him because he did make plays. He caught some really tough passes. He had the big celebrations and everything. He was someone that we thought was going to be a non-factor who was on the field sometimes as the only tight end over guys like Wilcox, sometimes even Hooper. So I think he also had some inconsistencies, like some drops, some plays that didn't look great. But if he can be consistent and continue to make plays, at the least maybe he makes it onto the practice squad. But definitely somebody who surprised me. I think he has a shot at potentially being a dark horse. Not a great shot, but still, again, he did surprise. Mitchell Wilcox has gotten more run also than I expected. I think part of that is that he's been in the NFL and he is an experienced player, kind of like an Austin Hooper in terms of just, it's a guy with NFL experience who's played live snaps. But he also has NFL tape that isn't terribly impressive. Like when the signing was made, I looked at him. I saw people saying that he was going to be an inline tight end. He's never been that in his career. He's really been more of an H-back, fullback kind of guy. And he's not a very good blocker, to be honest with you. Yeah. So I feel like once physicality ramps up, we could see him kind of slide a little bit. But the fact that he was used a decent amount was significant. So maybe, just again, more guys with experience in a position group with a lot of inexperienced players. But I think he's really on the outside looking in. And then Jacob Warren is the guy that I really was interested in. He played with Joe Milton at Tennessee. Not really relevant. Joe Milton's probably not going to be playing any significant snaps. But he does have more of a Y body type, which they don't really have. Austin is probably going to play some of that role, but isn't great in it. It's more that he's just seen so much. He's going to be a technically better blocker. But I like Warren's skill set. I hope he gets onto the practice squad. Really, really smart guy. Position versatile. He's a massive target, and he is a really high effort run blocker. He didn't really get an opportunity to show much because he's the last tight end on the depth chart, and he hasn't really gotten a chance to show that physicality. So I'm hoping to see more from him, but at this point, I didn't see nearly enough to warrant giving him a roster spot.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. I think, again, I think the one I do wonder what they what they think of Jaheim Bell when it's all said and done too. I mean, it's 7th round pick, so it doesn't hurt if you cut him and bring him back on the practice squad, but also
I think he'd have to be bad to not.
I think so too, but I wonder with him being such a late pick, how they value him, what they think, if there's other places they might want to cut guys, etc. But we'll see what happens. I'm with you. I have him on my, my mental roster that I haven't completely written out yet, but we'll see what happens. So offensive line, I'll read them, who's in, who's out, and you can tell me why, because there's a lot of them, and I'll kind of give you the floor. But David Andrews, Mike Onwenu, Sidy Sow, Chuks Okorafor, Nick Leverett, Calvin Anderson, Vidarian Lowe, Caden Wallace, and Layden Robinson all make the team. Michael Jordan, Antonio Mafi, Tyrone Wheatley Jr., Charles Turner III, and Zuri Henley are out, with Cole Strange and Jake Andrews on PUP/IR, depending on how you want to look at that. Again, I think Cole Strange is an obvious IR candidate. We don't know about Jake Andrews' injury, but he wasn't there for much of the spring. So tell me your thoughts, because Calvin Anderson, Vidarian Lowe, versus a guy like Antonio Mafi, where you think the tackle depth is at, etc. Could be some sort of position battles, not against each other, but, who do you want more or less, etc. So give me a reasoning behind who you kept in the offensive line and who you cut.
Yeah, I just think Antonio Mafi would need a really good summer to make the roster. They're clearly trying to cross-train him and give him some center opportunities.
Yeah.
I just don't think he's a great fit in the scheme, and he was bad last season, if we're being totally honest. I was excited about him after that Dallas game. I thought he showed some real flashes. Yeah. And Scott Peters, I feel like, is the perfect coach to get whatever talent in him, whatever talent is there. But right now, I just couldn't justify it. And it's also fine. We're really going more by rotations and skill set than we are off of execution, because we really don't know how these guys are going to execute when they can play to their strengths.
So in this scenario, then, who is the backup center, if you will, to David Andrews? Nick Leverett?
Nick Leverett, for sure.
Okay.
Once we saw the final offensive line shakeup where we have Caden Wallace at right tackle and Mike Onwenu at right guard, it was Nick Leverett. Instead of being the right guard, he was at center. Okay. And I think that makes the most sense. He has experience. He's a solid, versatile player. I just feel like that's kind of a layup. And then Michael Jordan, he's a guy who he was kicked out of practice for a fight. He got pulled out of reps for, I think it was a false start or something like that. And also just in his career hasn't been an outstanding player, even as a depth piece. So I think he has an uphill battle to make the roster. Charles Turner, the undrafted free agent rookie out of LSU, someone who was in the SEC, has seen a lot of high-level competition. I think he's got an outside chance of making the roster, if not the practice squad. Definitely a dark horse to keep your eye on.
Yep.
And one thing I will admit is I could see Calvin Anderson and Vidarian Lowe end up fighting for one roster spot. I just think that tackle depth is very important, especially considering what we saw last season where guys were dropping like flies.
Yep.
And Caden Wallace, I think, will end up being a day one starter. I think they're going to want to get him on the field. And the lineup that we saw with Chuks Okorafor, Sidy Sow, David Andrews, Mike Onwenu, and then Caden Wallace doesn't make the most sense. And then on the interior, Layden Robinson is obviously a lock. And then Nick Leverett. I feel like those are two good pieces, especially having Mike Onwenu with someone who has a little bit of flexibility. I think they're pretty set there. And there just weren't any other interior guys where at this point I would have felt comfortable saying, yeah, I really think this guy's going to make the team.
Yeah, the one thing I wonder about is the severity of Jake Andrews' injury, which we don't know about, where if he is healthy, do they have to, find a way to keep him on the roster instead of using PUP as that sort of fail safe rather for him. But we'll see what happens there. The only one other that I kind of mentioned before is Mafi. That's the one where I kind of wonder about, because he has seemed like that, second center behind Andrews. But you're right too, where when they did the other bump out, you saw some Nick Leverett there. So if they can use him as that backup spot, keep more tackles around, because tackle seems like sort of more of a mystery right now than guard. That would make a ton of sense. And then the UFL kid they signed as well, this was published before they officially signed him. I can't even think of his name off the top of my head right now. His name is Fornadell. Fornadell.
Yes.
You wonder if he can make a push too. He's a guy that's coming in from the UFL. We'll see what happens, but we haven't seen him yet, so we have nothing to sort of base that off of. So that's the offense. We'll get into defense, defensive line, linebackers, cornerback, safety, and specialist. But before we do that, quick words from our friends over at Game Time.
The NBA Finals are finally here, and if I have any chance at all to find tickets to a game, it's probably going to be through Game Time, an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Getting through the Game Time app is super easy, and I really like their user interface. All you have to do is go to the game or event that you want to attend, go through the venue to see where you want to sit relative to the action. Then you can actually get a panoramic view of your seat so you'll know exactly what to expect once you get your ticket. Game Time's also great for those weekends where you're not really sure what you want to do with your night, because you can just scroll through, look at flash deals, zone deals, or last-minute tickets, and find a plan to spend the rest of your day or evening. You can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. And your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticket industry. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
All right, defensive line. Let's talk about it. Christian Barmore off a big extension. Matthew Judon, Devon Godchaux, Keon White, Anthony Jennings, Dietrich Wise, Joshua Uche, Daniel Quale, Armand Watts, Jeremiah Farms, and O'Shane Jimenez in. Sam Roberts, Tristan Hill, William Bradley King, John Morgan III, and Jotham Russell out. Another one that's pretty obvious, guys who might, are fighting for spots, I guess. Jimenez, maybe Jeremiah Farms. But, I mean, there's a lot of guys in, Judon, Wise, Uche, Godchaux. Unless they can't figure out the Godchaux money, who was a de facto hold-in this last month, seems like this one's pretty obvious. Can anyone on the outs, make a push? What do you think of the room as a whole here? And why did you decide to keep these 11 guys?
Yeah, I think maybe the most surprising one was O'Shane Jimenez. I've seen he didn't make some people's projections. The biggest thing for me there is he's a versatile guy. He can play on the ball, off the ball, contributing coverage as a pass rusher, run defender. I love that versatility. He was with Drew Wilkins last year in Wick Martindale's defense with the Giants. I think that is really significant. I could see him not making the roster if they need another spot somewhere else. But I also think that he's one of the only edge defenders outside of Matthew Judon and maybe Keon White, who does have that type of versatility and that every down flexibility, which I think is going to be really valuable for that position. Especially with Judon coming up the biceps, you have no idea how much he can or can't participate. And Like you mentioned, the contract situations with Judon, one, he's participating, which is huge. He held in last season. Godchaux now is the one holding in. We'll see what happens. It's not like Godchaux has a ton of leverage, but you'd also understand a guy who's on a one-year deal with no guarantees might want to get a little bit of a little bit of security, which would make a lot of sense. And you mentioned Jeremiah Farms. I actually think he's someone that we're not talking about quite enough. Now, he's just going to be a depth piece. Maybe down the road, he can have a bigger role as a nose tackle, especially if Devon Godchaux, if things do fall through and he doesn't end up playing. I think that's where Jeremiah Farms has a much bigger role. But he came on towards like mid to late last season. I know Bo Allen had a whole breakdown of Christian Barmore and at one point mentioned Jeremiah Farms, which I thought was really cool because when I was going through the roster towards the end of the season, I was looking at Farms and I'm like, this dude is quick. He's powerful. He's really active with his hands. He's got a great motor. He's someone I'm excited to watch in the preseason. He dominated last preseason as well. He was one of the guys that we talked about a lot along with Sam Roberts. Sam Roberts is on the opposite end of the spectrum where he was kind of playing in midseason, then fell off and wasn't active for really the end of the year. So that's why I have Sam Roberts off. I really like him. When he's on, he plays really well, but he hasn't been able to take on double teams. Maybe that won't be as much of an issue in this scheme under DeMarcus Covington, where we know, like Joshua Uche said, it'll fit his skill set more. Maybe there will be more penetration. I'm not sure, but, I don't love his chance. But the rest of these guys, I feel like it's pretty cut and dry. The guys who I have making the team were either already starters, either last season or before last season, before getting hurt, with the only exceptions really being O'Shane Jimenez and Armand Watts because they were signed just this season. And then Sam Roberts, Tristan Hill, William Bradley King, John Morgan, Jotham Russell. Jotham Russell is a guy who's an exemption. Maybe they like him enough that he makes the practice squad or something like that. But these other guys, we just haven't really seen anything. There's been very little impact from the defensive line. There's been times where Barmore's dominating up front, but it's like, Barmore's probably going to kick your ass if you're not wearing pads. So, another position. We don't have to get too deep into the weeds, but O'Shane Jimenez, I would consider a dark horse to make the roster. Really the only dark horse other than Kayshon Boutte I do have making the roster. And then, Jeremiah Farms, a guy to watch out for.
Yeah. All right. Linebackers: Jawan Bentley, Jelani Tavai, Sione Takitaki, and Raekwon McMillan. And missing the cut, rather, Christian Ellis, Joe Giles Harris, Steele Chambers, who they signed last week, and John Trey Hunter. Christian Ellis was a waiver claim last year out of Philly, who I think he ended up starting a couple of games in Philly, and then all of a sudden was cut, and the Patriots was like, hell yeah, we'll claim that guy. Didn't really do too much last year. So I'm with you. I don't see that. Taki dealing with an injury, but I don't think that's going to be anything serious. Raekwon McMillan, coming back from another season-ending injury last year, has sort of turned into that de facto coach role with them. So I wonder if he finally gets healthy and makes the roster. You have him on right now. But yeah, what's your thought process behind the room as a whole?
Another one where we don't really know much, especially because Sione Takitaki and Jelani Tavai haven't really practiced. They've been injured and watched from the sidelines. Jawan Bentley is a lock, one of the real heart and soul kind of guys on that defense. And we obviously know the value he brings in their scheme, where he is kind of like a lineman at the second level, which, became a joke a little bit inside the locker room, where I think it was Lawrence Guy kept telling me that he was going to snitch on me and tell Jawan Bentley I said that, and that scared the crap out of me.
What'd you call him? Yeah, you called him fat, right?
Yo, because I asked the question, I was like, what's it like having a lineman basically at the second level? He's like, are you calling him fat?
Yeah.
Tell him to call him fat. I was like, please don't do that. He is such a terrifying, very nice, but very terrifying individual. But yeah, those guys are obviously locks. Sione Takitaki is a guy that, if you watch Elliott Wolf talk about him when the Browns drafted him, loved Takitaki. Also, we got to speak to him during his opening presser, got to speak to him as well at the community service event the Patriots did. Awesome guy. Very, very, very nice. Really knowledgeable, easy guy to speak to. You could see where he would really fit in that locker room. And Raekwon McMillan, a guy that I think this team values a lot more than we realize on the outside. Although it's pretty obvious if you look at what they did when he had 2 season-ending injuries before the season started since he's been signed with the Patriots. Both times they signed him to an extension and added another year to his contract.
Right.
I think that tells you that he seems like a guy who's maybe an internal leader type, has versatility, can play on and off the ball. He's their fastest linebacker as well, by far the most athletic, pure linebacker that they have among the veterans. So I see him making the roster. A guy that I would say to watch for is Steele Chambers. Mm-hmm. They actually cut Jay Persons, who was awesome at the community service event with the kids. It was really unfortunate to see him cut, but the business, that's what it is.
I know. It's tough.
Yeah, he's really nice. But, Steele Chambers is a guy that they signed after cutting him. And if you watch his tape, pedigree, he played at Ohio State. So, there's clearly something there. But he's physical. He used to play running back, and you can tell when he plays as a run defender because he's a lot of the time in the hole before the running back. And you can also see the patience where he's not really in a rush. But when he keys into where the running back's going, he gets there really quickly. Is also solid in coverage. Really just fits the Patriots' MO. Only thing is he's very undersized. He's about 225.
Okay.
So there's something to consider there, but he'd probably be more of a special teamer, I think, with a possibility of maybe in the future, if they keep him around, taking over for like a Raekwon McMillan if they don't keep him around. So one guy I would say to watch in the out category would be Steele Chambers. Joe Giles Harris, I think, actually did make 1 or 2 plays in camp. I can't remember them off the top of my head. I just remember kind of being surprised that I saw him flash out there. So maybe him as well, but really Steele Chambers is the one I'll be keeping an eye on during the summer.
Yeah. All right. Getting to the defensive backfield, cornerback room, a room we've talked about a lot on the show as sort of one of these camp battles going into training camp, and also a battle of the week we were keeping our eye on in minicamp. Taylor, you have Christian Gonzalez, Jonathan Jones, Marcus Jones, Alex Austin, Isaiah Bolden, and Marcellus Dial on the roster, with Sean Wade, Marco Wilson, Azizi Hearn, Mikey Victor, and Caleb Ford-Demet not making the cut. First thing I think of is Marco Wilson and Sean Wade, probably tough cuts, guys who could, you would think, develop maybe into one of those other boundary cornerbacks. But with Alex Austin coming on, with Isaiah Bolden also coming on as a slot guy and someone who we think could help on special teams, just a move to be made. So tell me your thoughts on this and how much confidence you have in Alex Austin really developing into that guy across from Christian Gonzalez.
I've liked Alex Austin since he got playing time last season, because you can definitely see the talent, and we've mentioned the swagger and all that. He was competitive. He gave up some plays underneath for sure in the spring, but was in on a lot of those plays. It's not like he's getting beat badly out there. It's just by nature of the cornerback position, you're going to give up some plays. And he and Marco Wilson seem like they're really fighting for a roster spot as one of those boundary corners. Not necessarily boundary perimeter, because boundary means something specific. I should kind of make sure I check myself when I say that. But
right. I'll do the same.
Somebody called me out on it last year, and I was like, "You're absolutely right," because I say boundary meaning the short side of the field.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
So it's outside or perimeter if you're kind of using the umbrella term, and then boundary if you're talking like a Christian Gonzalez is their top boundary corner.
Yeah,
they get a lot of those one-on-one matchups. But anyway, so I think Alex Austin pulls ahead of Marco Wilson, who's also mostly been quiet, but that's a good thing if you're a cornerback, if no one's really noticing you out there on the field. Sean Wade is a guy who's filled in admirably, but I think you draft Marcellus Style, you got Alex Austin on the rise. Isaiah Bolden should be healthy. I just don't really see a spot there unless, God forbid, somebody gets hurt. Azizi Hearn, Mikey Victor, and Caleb Ford-Dement, they've all made, a play or two in the spring. I don't, they're not so far outside of the possibility of making the roster as people who didn't really get a chance to make an impact, but at the same time, they're undrafted rookie free agents by nature of that. They're probably not going to make the team unless they shine when the competition really picks up. Although of that group, I'd say I'd keep an eye on Mikey Victor. He's got really great size and good athleticism for that size. He's like 6'3", really long arms, made a couple plays on the ball, though he did also give up some plays. So, but yeah, of that group of guys that are out, other than Marco Wilson, no one I think should really be much of a surprise, considering there's so much youth at the position.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the only one, again, is Wilson, who could make a push, depending on how we've done the dial thing about is he a safety, is he a corner, but in the end, he's been playing cornerback, first of all. Second of all, it doesn't really matter because he's a defensive back who's going to make the roster wherever you fit him in.
He's like special teams, like really. He's
exactly. Yeah, right. Yeah, you could list him as a specialist just as much as you could as a corner. But moving on to safety, Kyle Duggar, Peppers, Marte Mapu, Jalen Hawkins in. Joshua Bledsoe, Del Pettis. Is that how you say it? Del Pettis. Penis. Joshua Pettis. Joshua Bledsoe, a guy who has been around for so long. I feel like he's always on the fringe. A year he's made it, a year he missed it. Last year he was on the practice squad all season long, but unfortunately he gets cut in your roster projection. Was this an easy decision or a difficult decision for any of these guys in the safety room?
This one was pretty cut and dry. Jalen Hawkins, I mentioned him as one of my winners when we did winners and losers from the spring, because he seems like they really do want him as a deep safety in their 3 safety packages to get Kyle Duggar and Jabril Peppers close to the line of scrimmage where they thrive. I was actually watching tape from him from 2021. If you look at the last time he really played defense extensively in 2022, not a ton really jumps out to you. The range is pretty good, but he didn't make a ton of plays. I think in 2021, though, there were more flashes of, this guy's got versatility. He really comes downhill with the head of steam. Pretty physical guy, not really strong where he can get blocked out of plays at times, but I like him as a free safety type as long as he can be consistent in that role. I don't know how you keep him off the roster considering how often they use him. Marte Mapu seems like he's really taken over more of that Mac Wilson role as a dime linebacker where he also flashed. That's where he had an interception on Patrick Mahomes where he actually baited him last season. That was really cool. So that makes sense. Although Gerard Mayo said he's like a big slot corner, bigger safety, and smaller linebacker. So he's still going to be used everywhere. Joshua Bledsoe is like Kevin Harris for me, where it's like you've been around for a long time, but you pretty much lived on the practice squad. And in the preseason, they line him up all over the place. And you're like, okay, he's clearly got some smarts to him, but he's also not really making a lot of plays out there. And he is physically limited. He's kind of a stockier guy, so not great range. Really just an okay, solid athlete. That wasn't tough. And then Del Pettis, I have not noticed him once on the field. Nothing against him. It's hard to notice safeties on the field unless you're playing in the box. But, he's mostly been with, like, the depth guys. So that was pretty easy.
Yeah, we'll mention it again here. Jalen Hawkins has been awesome in camp so far. Hopefully he can continue that in training camp and keep it rolling and make this roster. All right, special teams to wrap it up, Taylor. A stunner here. Well, not really a stunner, but could be a stunner. But you have Brendan Schooler, Joe Cardona, punter Bryce Behringer, and kicker Joey Sly. Chad Ryland out. Why? What have you seen so far that makes you think that? First of all, I agree with you, but I'll let you explain it.
He's just inconsistent, man. He's missed a field goal. They do field goals at the end of every practice. He's missed one every time they did it. And then even the makes a lot of the time are not very convincing, where it's literally on the upright, where I think you could also argue that maybe like the tip is out and you're not You're not really sure. Sorry. You don't really see him kick right down the fairway very often. It always feels like it's tilting one way or the other. Just doesn't inspire a lot of confidence. You root for the guy, but he doesn't really give you a whole lot to really latch onto, even after changing his kicking form, which he mentioned. And Brian Hines did a great job pointing that out. Because there were some videos where I think it's just more. I think it's more upright, whereas last season he was really more leaning into it. But hasn't made a huge difference from the untrained eye or really from the results that we've seen. So I just, and they didn't sign a kicker from the UFL either, which I thought was kind of surprising.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a sign of faith in Ryland. I don't know.
But could be a sign of faith in Sly too. Could be something behind the scenes where they're like, hey, we just might roll with him for now.
For sure, because at first he looked like he was really just there to kind of be there. He wasn't even kicking the first day or two that we saw him on the field. But he has attempted 8 field goals along with Chad Ryland, and has made every single one. He's also proven that he is an NFL kicker, whether he's great or just fine. He's done it. And Chad Ryland was bad by college standards last season. So it's tough because you root for the guy, but I couldn't justify putting Chad Ryland on the roster. I feel like this is a position they're probably going to have to address next year in the draft.
I'm with you. I agree with all of it. Obviously, Brendan Schooler makes the team, Cardona and Behringer. And as far as kicker goes, I mean, Chad has to have a really good camp. There's no denying that. And even if you have Joey Sly on there now, they could sign someone else and Sly could be out. But I think that position is definitely up for grabs no matter who ends up making the team. I think it is viable that we see another kicker in that position to start this season. Because, again, Ryland just hasn't been doing it. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, we have about another 5 or 6 weeks, I believe, left until training camp. So me and Tayler will be here the entire time, keeping you covered here on Patriots Daily and Patriots Press Pass. So make sure you follow along on Twitter with Tayler at TKyles39 and with myself at Mike Kadlick. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, Patriots Press Pass. And until next time, we will see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. See ya.